Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer and KGO radio host TJ Mathewson, back here for another edition of the Edge podcast. Glad to be back with you guys. It's been a little bit of a hiatus, definitely a hiatus for TJ. We haven't talked since before the bowl game, so we got a lot to catch up on, but just want to go ahead and welcome you guys back into the podcast. Great to be back with you. TJ, how was your holiday, man? Did you get some downtime with the family? And yeah, it's 2023, my friend. What's your New Year's resolution?
Yeah, man. Whew, I haven't spent that much time in a row at home since I was unemployed before I started here. So it felt like a lot longer than I think the 11 days I was home in Seattle. So it was good to get some relaxation and see some family. I almost drove up on the day of the ice storm. I was thinking I was planning to drive up on Friday.
That was dicey.
I was planning to do that, and then everyone around here is like, you probably shouldn't do that. I was like, really? And they're like, no, you should drive now. And I'm thankful I did, because I drive up, I make the 4-hour trek after, the show here on Thursday, and I make it to Seattle, and I wake up the next day and my car is covered in about 1/8 of an inch of ice all the way around. It was just an absolute madhouse. I've never had it where you literally can't even walk on the concrete outside. I mean, I put my foot down and I'm trying to grip it, and it's sliding all over the place. This is dangerous.
Oh yeah. No, it was, I didn't end up being able to make it into work that day. Me and my 2-wheel drive Honda Civic were decommissioned that day. Couldn't even make it the 5-6 miles down the road here from where I work. But yeah, so that day, like you said, I've lived in Oregon my entire life. Seeing not any kind of snow. I know everyone kind of got something a little bit different, but here in Sherwood where I am, it was, like you said, just that feet of ice. So going outside to walk my dog or anything like that, it just almost felt like you were kind of floating a little bit because you couldn't find the ground. So definitely a unique weather thing, something I haven't really remembered too much in my lifetime. Very happy it didn't stay around very long, because it was still a little slushy going over to my family's at Christmas Eve the next day, or the day after, trying to remember my days. But yeah, glad it didn't stick around and impact Christmas. But while we are on the note, if anybody listened to the podcast ran into any flights during that stretch, I send my condolences to you. Everything that I saw on the news, and given that yours truly flew to Las Vegas the week prior, it hit home, and I had some delays myself getting down, and mine were simply just delays, not cancellations. So weather like ice and snow doesn't do great here up here in the Portland Metro, TJ.
No. Well, they don't salt the roads. They don't. They don't clear it. Although I don't even think you could really clear it, because I'm serious. Unless you salted all the ice, I mean, you would need a pick to get that ice off the ground. And it was so funny because I wake up on Friday morning, and my parents point out up the street at the top of our hill. We live on a hill. Yeah. And someone had already at 8:30 in the morning ran into the street post up there, and it was bent at a 45-degree angle. I was like, I need to go take a picture of this. Do you know how hard it was to get up that hill?
So, man, I couldn't even imagine being a little more.
The way it goes out my back door, right? I have to either go downstairs or I go to the garage and I go up a driveway. So it's really a lose-lose. So I ended up sliding down the stairs on my butt down to the sidewalk. And then from there, I'm like, okay, how am I going to get to the grass? Because at least the grass, you can kind of step through the ice.
Yeah.
I somehow made it across the sidewalk and I walked up the hill and I took a picture on the grass. And then getting back down was just an adventure. I literally had to slide on my ass across the sidewalk to get back to my back door. It was really funny to watch.
I can imagine. Like I said, it was a bit of a crazy weather pattern and all that. But again, glad it didn't last very long. Definitely added a little fun to the holidays for sure. And speaking of the fun holidays, obviously, as we mentioned, to open up the podcast, TJ and I haven't specifically talked with each other or in, the both of us together to you all since Oregon State's crushing of Florida in the Las Vegas Bowl. TJ, it seems like forever ago with the bowl season now all the way complete, with the Beavers being, some of the first teams to play. But, still a couple weeks later, the shine hasn't wore off yet. And we'll obviously get into the nuts and bolts. We're obviously going to get into DJ U choosing the Beavers as a little Christmas Eve present for Beaver fans, TJ. I know Oregon State fans were ecstatic to get that news. unofficially the day before Christmas Eve, officially the day of Christmas Eve. A lot to catch up on. But the biggest takeaway I've had in these last couple of weeks, TJ, the vibes are high for Oregon State football and just Oregon State right now in general. The highest I've seen in some time. There's some buzz about this program. There's some excitement. There's, people that I've ran into that are like, I can't wait for next season. People who are like, I can't wait for spring football. There's just a buzz about this program that 3-4 years ago, you would have thought was impossible.
I mean, the expectations are just changed now.
Yeah.
I mean, it is before anyone transferred in. You said, okay, Pac-12, you should probably – you want your goal next year is to win the conference. I mean, bar none. If you don't win the conference next year, you can call that a disappointment. And now you've got your quarterback. Yeah. Everyone was like, you need to go out there and get your blue chip quarterback. And I'm like, yes, I think you do. It is, but it is more importantly up to the support system, the boosters, the collectives at Oregon State to make it happen, because that's what it's going to cost. And they got one of the biggest fishes in the pond. Could you imagine going back to, the 2020 class and saying DJU is going to be at Oregon State? Number 2 player nationally in his recruiting class. Number 2.
I mean, it's still something that I think a lot of Beaver fans are like, I'll believe it when I see it kind of a thing. And, obviously he's here, all those things. But we talked about it before we jumped on the pod. He'll likely officially be official, like a referee whistle on January 9th when winter term starts. That's the expectation. But I mean, not just that, TJ, because we're obviously going to, talk about what DJ is going to bring to the program a little bit more later in the podcast, but just the cascading bits of good news. Katano Ladapo announces he's coming back for another year. James Rawls announces he's coming back for another year. The deflection obviously being Alex Austin declaring for the NFL draft. But so far, a few guys still have decisions to make. Riley Sharp, Isaac Hodgins. I'm drawing a blank on someone else off the top of my head who definitely is still in the mix to make a decision whether or not to come back. But so far, like getting a couple big time acquisitions to come back is key.
Yeah, it's big, and there's going to be another transfer portal period in May 1st to the 15th where you could see more departures after spring football. So that's really the only other period to think about, because the portal itself closes. I wrote it down yesterday. Do you know when exactly? January what? 15th?
It's coming up. Let me look it up real quick.
I think it might be Sunday the 15th is when it closes and guys can't jump in the portal anymore. So
January 18th. So we got some time still.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're getting closer and closer to we're getting a good picture of what next year's roster would look like.
Right.
And, let's be objective here. The Pac-12 next year is going to be really good. I thought in the regular season, the Pac-12 as a conference as a whole, you could argue is the best conference, right?
Yeah.
6 top 20 teams. No other conference had that. The Pac-12 did not have the best teams, but they had the most good teams.
Right.
So, what Oregon State's going to be tasked with doing next year is arguably winning the deepest conference in college football. And that's a tough task. But if you were to pick a roster to do it, this would be the roster, because it is shaping up to get better and better and better.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, more than anything, TJ, when you're kind of looking at like how the pieces are starting to come together, like obviously, as I mentioned, Alex Austin and Rajon Wright are, for Austin declaring early, Wright, being a senior. The Beavers lose a pair of corners, and then Jaden Grant obviously departing as well because of eligibility and graduation. How key was it for Oladapo to come back and kind of add some experience to that secondary, along with who we expect most likely, actually not most likely, in all likelihood, Alton Julian to be healthy and 100% back this year?
So then you think about it this way. Okay, you have 2 returning safeties, a guy in Alton Julian who you really liked in the 2021 season. He just got hurt, unfortunately, but now he's going to be healthy for 2023. So it's like, okay, so we only have to replace half of our secondary. And the problem is, you look at Rajon Wright and Alex Austin, it's like, well, those are probably 2 NFL corners. Maybe they're not going to start in the NFL, but they're probably going to make a roster, right? You would think. Right. So what you can do when you have 2 NFL corners is just so much different. I mean, you can trust those guys so much more to just sit them out there on the outside, and it really gives Trent Bray a lot more freedom with what he can call on defense. Now, when you have other guys sliding in there, maybe they have as much confidence in those guys, but we're going to have to see it first.
Right.
And
I mean,
it changes.
I mean,
it might change initially what they're going to do on defense.
yeah, no, I think there's definitely a need now for the Beavers, and I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on as far as positions go. In the via the portal is maybe looking for a guy who can instantly play at corner. I think they like the depth. I mean, we saw what Ryan Cooper was able to do in his first year. I think he's going to be a really good player for this program. Obviously, as we mentioned, Alton Julian back, Oladapo back, and then Jaden Robinson when he played in the stead of Rajon Wright played pretty well. So I think they like what they have beyond those guys. There's some unproven depth there. Skylar Thomas, a couple other guys who have given you time, but not quite as deep as it was this last year where Ryan Cooper and, Jaden Grant or whoever was kind of like your extra guy as far as wanting to fill in the nickel, fill in the safety. So it's definitely going to be a challenge to replace some guys. And obviously the name that I missed earlier that still has a decision to make, TJ, is Omar Spates, obviously right in the middle of the linebacking core. So the way I see it is you've still got Omar Spates, Riley Sharp, Isaac Hodgins, and then potentially Deshaun Fenwick in that category of guys who I believe technically have graduated, could move on, be done with football, enter the transfer portal. Just based on how the scholarships have shaken out, and we've taken a look at BeaversEdge.com, I think there's going to be a little bit more attrition, maybe not out of that specific group that I just mentioned, but I think there will be a few more guys to depart between now and say maybe spring, maybe after. But for the most part, I expect a good amount of that group to come back. I mean, I think it's possible that like Omar Spates is kind of deciding. I think he's got, the talent to potentially play at the next level consistently. So I think he's kind of in that mix. But yeah, I mean, just based on the tone of like James Rawls and Oladapo, both guys who penned in their letter, TJ, came back to want to win a Pac-12 championship. That seems like something guys on the fence might be like, hey, let's run it back.
And I think the biggest positive is you didn't see – there's really no attrition from the – you mentioned there will be based on scholarships, which I believe. But
yeah, I mean, two or three, four guys maybe. Yeah, not
initially
many.
After the season, there is like no one entering the portal besides Chance Nolan, really.
Yeah, you had Chance Nolan. You had Ron Harge right before the season ended. I'm trying to think of who else. Jonathan Riley entered the portal as well as a scholarship guy, but like you said, minimal.
Really, it's just minimal. And that just speaks so much volume to where the program culture is at. And
it's pretty,
what the guys believe they can do next year. I mean, it should be something special. And, I think when people see, okay, well, we have DJ now, even though like the coaching staff's not going to say DJ is starting right away because they want to keep Ben. And they don't. Right. There's no real depth in that quarterback room now. Tristan Gebbia, who we had on our local show here today on 1240 Joe Radio, he's in the transfer portal. He's going to get an extra year to play. He's going to go somewhere else. He's going to want to, as we talk to him during the fall, he's going to want to get into coaching eventually. So that'll probably factor into somewhat of his decision of where he wants to go. But so he's in the portal. He's not coming back. Chance in the portal.
You still got Travis,
and then you have Throckmorton unproven, Don Montiel unproven, Aiden Childs raw and unproven. So, Jonathan doesn't want Ben to go. Ben's already gotten his flavor of starting and succeeding in this offense. Well, you got this, 5-star blue chip guy coming in, and you probably paid him a handsome amount of money to get here. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as things go along.
You sure we just didn't give him a local boys scholarship, TJ? I mean,
well,
I mean,
he's probably not going to
be. He's probably not going to be paying for food in Corvallis, right? I mean,
no, I doubt it.
I
mean, we can speculate. I'm sure if we went through enough back channels, we could figure out what he's getting.
I'll say
he did not come here out of the good of his heart.
Well, and I'll say this, out of, all the fun speculation, I don't have any behind the scenes on what exactly was the hook, line, and sinker to land the big fish that, it's, let me put it this way, TJ, what were they using for bait, right? That is the question.
Was it the $400,000 in the 4-bedroom house that JT Daniels wanted?
I mean, who knows, right? I mean,
Do you think Rice
eventually,
gave him that?
no. I think his market value, it's like a stock, right? It's like you had
Right.
good it's like going up or going down. But no, I mean,
Right.
I'm sure eventually maybe something will come out. Maybe it won't, and who knows, right? With that whole situation. But it's the name of the game. It's not like it's shady or dirty or anything like that in college football. Everybody's doing it. So, kudos to Oregon State if they did for kind of moving that along. But let's have a little bit of fun here, TJ. Say his full name.
DJ Uiagalelei. I've said it like a
Yep,
thousand
me
times.
too.
Yeah.
Uiagalelei. Yep. I've nailed it now. I've nailed it. So if any of you that are listening, watching at home, try to practice it 10 times fast and see if you can have it by the time spring and
It's
fall
not
come
that
around.
hard once you get it down, to be honest with
But I will say, after combing through YouTube and looking up, when he first came over, learning how to say it correctly, learning, how different announcers have said it, and some have really messed up on it over the years, TJ. But no, hearing Dabo Sweeney at Clemson say before the season, he goes, "Yeah, he's just cool if you call him DJU," and I'm like, that's gonna work for a lot of Oregon State fans. That's gonna work just fine, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's a problem he's had to deal with before. I mean that it's a tricky last name, but it's now going to be a family affair here in the Mid Willamette Conference because his brother, a 5-star
Yeah,
defensive end, is going to be at Oregon.
going down
So that
south.
probably helps. Yeah, it
Yeah,
probably
no, it's
helped.
gonna.
That'll make the Civil War very fun.
Yeah, the sibling rivalry, and we were talking about it a little bit on Rip City Mornings. We couldn't ever think of a situation where a pair of brothers this high profile had played opposing at the two schools. Now, granted, that wasn't a deep dive, so if anyone knows a close example of something like this, feel free to drop it in the comments because I'm very curious. But to my knowledge, TJ, this is like the first like real massive sibling rivalry between like two blue chip recruits.
Like ever?
I mean, as far like at Oregon and Oregon State specifically, like a
Well,
brother at
yes.
Oregon and a brother at Oregon State kind of a
It
thing.
helps they're both 5 stars, 5-star
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, and again, because of Oregon State's relative lack of 5 stars, just recruiting history, that's just kind of how that cookie crumbled, so to speak. But I'm just kind of curious to get a thought on your numbers, TJ. What stands out to you the most about DJ? For me, it wasn't so much his just like his the numbers as much as it was. I love his physique, his frame, how he's big and tall. I like that he's able to run and had his most successful year running the football this last year. I think you can kind of mesh the Coletto package into a DJ type package. And I also like that, he was a little bit more efficient this year passing the ball. Certainly can clean up a little bit of his efficiency. I think he can trim down his interceptions a little bit. But bottom lining it, TJ, there are things he can do with the football that no one else on the roster currently can is from that quarterback position. You go on YouTube and watch his deep ball placement. It's no disrespect to the guys, but Oregon State just hasn't had that.
No, they haven't. And there's a reason. Like, if you think back to his like high school recruiting, he would be the number one recruit Oregon State's ever had if he came here out of high school. He's not, of course, he's a transfer, but that's just kind of the talent we're talking about. And whatever I think about DJ, I remember his first start he ever had. You remember that? Trevor Lawrence had COVID, and so he had to sit out at Notre Dame. He goes on the road to an eventual top 4 Notre Dame team, and lights him up for 400 yards, and probably should have won the game. Notre Dame came back and won the game that game later because Clemson's defense got shredded. But, he was just awesome in that game. And that's always what I think about because it seemed like from that moment on, like the expectations of DJ were just that he has to be Bryce Young, who was the guy who he was right behind in the recruiting rankings back in 2020. And Bryce Young, of course, is probably going to go number 1 overall in this draft to the Houston Texans. And people are looking at DJ, okay, well, why aren't you that?
Yeah.
Well, I think that might have, maybe we'll get a little bit out of him when spring football rolls around and we get to talk to him about, what his time was like at Clemson, if he really felt that pressure. And
growth isn't always linear. That's the thing.
No, it's not.
Everybody's journey is different, right? Everyone's journey has different ups and downs. And, I hate to use it as a example, but it's like, you look at just around college football, right? Whether it's, Cam Ward, excuse me, coming out of a Division II school in Incarnate Word up to Washington State. Dare I say the success of Bo Nix going from Auburn to Oregon, kind of the same kind of a deal. Auburn was kind of done with Bo Nix. He ended up going there. You look at just numerous other transfers, and now Oregon State kind of gets into that mix. And I think they kind of have a little, obviously, Penix. Duh. Sorry I knew I was forgetting another big one. Penix with, his success coming over from Indiana to Washington, lead the nation in passing. I think Oregon State was kind of like, I want some of that and kind of get in on that mix a little bit. And now I think they finally got their stud. I mean, how many times, TJ, throughout this, football season did you and I sit here on this podcast say, well, that's a game that they might have won with elite quarterback play. That's a game they might have won with elite quarterback play. Maybe even just great quarterback play instead of average to maybe good average. Good on maybe a good couple series below average. I mean, I can't, Ben did win Las Vegas Bowl MVP, TJ, so I have to give him his flowers a little bit.
And I think DJ's going to enjoy sort of a change of pace in offense because I think
it's a lot more pro style.
There's no hard facts on this, but there's just some speculation that the Clemson coaching staff didn't exactly help him out that much. It seemed like, or at least it wasn't a good fit for his skill set per se. Yeah, and now it's going to be a different offense. I mean, it's a true pro style offense they run here. And when you're like, hey, you want to go to the NFL? It's like, oh, I'm going to run a pro style offense. We're going to line up under center, deep play action, throw the ball down the field, run the ball well. Yep. Operate from the pocket, all things I think DJ can do well. And the added element, the fact that he's massive and he can run, I mean, it's awesome. It is awesome. I'm so happy for Beaver fans that they're going to get this to watch this guy.
Oh, yeah. Excuse me again. It's going to be special. And that's something that I think Oregon State fans, there hasn't been a guy like that or like this, rather, under center in years. And I think he's going to bring an element, to the position that is just going to be really special. And, I think the sky is truthfully the limit if, some other pieces can fall into place. And again, like I mentioned earlier, I think if Omar Spates comes back, I think if Isaac Hodgins comes back, you maybe grab, a depth piece at receiver, maybe grab a depth piece at corner. All of a sudden, you're running back a unit, TJ, that really resembles the same group that you had this last year. We talk about, DJ obviously got to throw in the offensive line addition of Grant Stark coming over from Nevada too, right around the same time. Kind of got lost in the shuffle with DJ, but Grant obviously was, a big time offensive lineman in Nevada and a guy a lot of people feel can be a plug and play replacement potentially for Brenden Kipper, as he was an all Mountain West selection. So I really liked how the Beavers just kind of quietly handled their business, TJ. They trounced Florida, went into the holiday break, and had a nice little transfer portal Christmas present. And now, you talk about the lack of attrition going on these last couple of weeks. A few guys kind of moving on, making their decisions based on what's best for them individually, of course. But as we turn the clock now and get to January, we've got more guys announcing that they're coming back. And I think it's going to be very interesting to kind of see how the final dominoes kind of fall with the February signing period before we get into April or March, whenever spring football ultimately ends up being, because spring football is going to have an exciting element to this year, or to it this year, excuse me.
Yeah, it is. I think it's going to be, for the site, it's probably going to be a highest traffic you've gotten in how many years, you would guess?
It's gonna, I mean, just the excitement around the program, right? People want to be a part of it. Speaking of which, if you're not a part of BeaversEdge, you absolutely need to be. It's got great inside information, and like TJ said, we're gonna be all over spring football this year, so it's gonna be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, I mean, just the hubbub, the buzz. Oregon State coming off a 10-win campaign. I mean, the program just has not been there in years that we haven't seen. So how Oregon State can sustain this success is going to be interesting. And the last point I want to mention before we kind of wrap up the podcast, TJ, is just kind of mentioning how you think they're going to fit into the scheme of the Pac-12, next year, just based on what we see, just to kind of, we mentioned it earlier, the Pac-12 started off good, right? We thought, Pac-12 bowl season was looking good. Then, didn't end so well as USC, Utah, UCLA, all fall along with Washington State and Oregon State, Washington are the lone winners. you look at how the conference is shaking out next year. You've got Michael Penix up there in Seattle. You've got DJ U in Corvallis. You've got Bo Nix in Eugene. You've got, Cam Rising potentially back in Utah. You've obviously got Caleb Williams back in USC. Couple other guys that, maybe aren't quite as high profile that I'm just, missing on at the moment, TJ. But
Dante Moore.
One heck of a group. I mean, there's going to be a lot of talent in the Pac-12 next year. And as you mentioned, the gauntlet for Oregon State to go through. But do you think, based on everything that we've seen, and I think yes, the acquisition of DJU closed the gap, and now it really is just may the best team win kind of a thing, and Oregon State won't be like the big what if that's out there.
Yeah, they're on the same tier now. At least last year, you're like, man, if only I had a quarterback. Only I had good quarterback play, as we've already mentioned. Oh, if the quarterback play was better. Well, there's no excuse now because I think you're on the same tier as everyone else. You're on the same tier as Utah with Cam Rising back. You're on the same tier as Washington, I think. Washington's going to be a preseason top 10, top 5 team with Michael Penix.
Yeah,
going to be in that group as well with Caleb Williams in a top recruiting class. Oregon back is going to be up there. Again, Dante Moore was the number one quarterback in the class. He's going to UCLA. He flipped from Oregon when Kenny Dillingham left and is going to
Oregon
UCLA
State,
now.
Oregon State will be preseason ranked. They'll be in that mix, obviously.
Right. Oregon State should be preseason, 15 or something? They'll be ranked. They'll be ranked pretty high in the preseason. I mean, the expectation is going to be there now. It is there. You are on the same tier as everyone else. You got to go win those games. You're going to go win those games.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because, like you said, the talent in this conference, particularly at the quarterback position, has not been seen, I think, in many years. And I think it's going to be, if you thought this year was exciting and, the number of 10-win teams in the conference, a couple 11-win teams as well, it was right down to the final day. You talk about how the Pac-12, title game was ultimately impacted. Utah ended up going, and it's setting the stage for what's going to be a very exciting 2023 campaign. And as we mentioned, Oregon State wrapped up the early signing period, added a couple of transfers in DJU and Grant Stark, and then, now kind of approach kind of the second half of the signing period coming up in February and kind of starting to turn their eye towards spring football. And, like you said, it's going to be very interesting to see how it all kind of shakes out. But nevertheless, TJ, an exciting time for Oregon State athletics, and exciting time, particularly for Oregon State football. And, if you had asked or told somebody that this is how it would be when Oregon State, hired Jonathan Smith, the most optimistic fan probably would have, had a bit of a, are we sure kind of a thing.
10 wins. 10 wins.
Yeah.
But here they are, 10 wins. It's like, it's the norm now. And that's what it is. And it feels sustainable. It really does.
Yeah. And I think as long as Oregon State continues to have staff continuity, continues to, recruit the way that they're recruiting and, make them, great personnel decisions, locking in Trent Bray, so on and so forth. I think you're right. Go ahead.
You mentioned personnel continuity. And I keep seeing more and more about how much other assistants are making. And I see Trent Bray's extension, and he got a pretty good pay bump for Oregon State. But the thing, I don't know what his number is to get blown away. But I'm watching USC against Tulane, and that their defense just absolutely falling apart, like absolutely. And people are, all off the Alex Grinch train down there. It seems like
crazy.
Would USC do that? Would they blow him away?
The style of life doesn't suit him. I just don't see it. I don't see it.
We just say that to a point, though.
Yeah, I mean,
to a point, and then someone offers to, offers you 100, 200 or 150% of your current salary, raise.
Yeah, I mean, right? If he's making let me put it this way. That's the difference, right? Living in Corvallis, Oregon, making $700,000 a year. Say he was even just going to be making 1.5. You're losing how much more of that in taxes and cost of living?
Okay, I mean that's a decent point, but I mean At some point, I feel like there is a like a freeze point there.
So how come
it reaches it?
I mean, it's a different situation, but how come he couldn't be Oregon State's Brent Venables when he was Clemson's defensive coordinator for 8 years and turned down numerous offers?
That would also require the university, I think, to pony up a little bit more than what they're paying him right now. There's a reason. Yeah. There's a reason his contract is only 2 years.
Oh, yeah. Right. No, I totally agree with you. I think it has to continue to be – it's stacked like pieces of cheddar on a burger, right? I think it's going to have to keep going year by year.
Right.
But so, I think go ahead. Yeah.
Say just for example, right? Like I'm home, I'm driving around, I'm listening to the Husky pregame show before their Alamo Bowl win.
Yeah, sure.
Did you know their offensive coordinator is now making $2 million a year?
I believe it.
And I'm thinking, okay, it's like, well, they qualify him as an elite coordinator in this conference, and Trent Bray falls under that same category, and he's making $700,000.
Yeah, the way that I see it is it's about earning it along the way, right? So it's kind of like how last year they wrote a brand new contract for Jonathan, and then this year, not even 12 months later, wrote him a brand new contract and double his money. I think it's more about just like proving, and I think it's like Trent Bray's defense was great this year. He does it again next year, probably double his money again. So I think
I would not be shocked if you mentioned rewriting, if they just rewrite it again sometime this spring. If
they could. I mean,
if he leverages it, because I wouldn't be shocked if USC walks up to his front door is like, we'll write you a check.
Yeah, I mean, if based, from what I think I know, and covering this program, I think now that they're winning and what I know about how football is the cash cow that drives everything else. When football's making money, your university is making money. And when football's not making money, your university is, athletic department side, maybe not doing so well. So now that Oregon State's winning games, if you keep winning games, you can write checks that you plan to, cash later, so to speak. Look at Colorado, who's like, yeah, we don't know how we're going to pay Dion, but we'll figure it out. That's kind of the name of the game to keep up. And it's like, does Oregon State have every dollar allocated towards the Smith extension right now? Maybe, maybe not. But regardless, they're like, this momentum, we have to capitalize it. Well, it's like a stock, right? You have to buy it and, get it. And I think it's kind of like Trent Bray is continuing to show that respect, giving him raises, yearly, bi-yearly. That I think will keep him competitive. And I think it's like within, kind of like with Smith, as long as he's within an earshot of his peers, then I say, but when you do the math and break it all down, I think Oregon State will have a hard time losing assistants. I just don't think it'll happen too much because Jonathan is, picking guys that want to be here. And I think it goes the same way with the players. Like you said, the lack of attrition. I just think, why would you want to leave Oregon State right now, TJ? That's the big thing.
It's a good point. That's a good point. So, some people would say for $2 million. Some people would say for $2 million. But if that's not your motivation, then you're right.
You're talking about an imaginary offer. It's not even there.
Well, it could be there. Did you watch that bowl game?
Right, but I'm just saying it could. It's not like it's being reported or anything. So I mean, TJ's throwing some bad vibes out into the East Coast right now.
Well, I'm just being objective here. So when I saw that collapse, that is the first thing I thought of.
Yeah, I didn't really think about it.
That's all I thought of.
Yeah, no, and honestly, for the other side of the coin, I didn't think about it because that, like I said, hearing what Trent Bray said when he's like, I don't have the desire to be a head coach. This is the style of life that I like. And then most importantly, TJ, money does not motivate me. Granted, you could be saying that for the cameras, but how many guys actually do that? I don't know if I could be able to do that.
All I'll say is Nick Saban said he didn't want the Alabama job. That's all I'll say. That's all I'll say.
Fair enough. All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up this edition of the podcast. Big thanks to TJ for joining me. It only took us just a few minutes to start laughing and having fun again. Certainly enjoy doing this podcast with you, man. It's been too long, and we definitely won't wait nearly as long to do our next one. We'll be back here in the next week or two. So thanks for joining me as always, man. Appreciate it, and we'll be chatting soon for sure.
All right. Sounds good, buddy.
All right. Well, thanks again to TJ for joining me on this edition of the Edge podcast. Keep it locked to BeaversEdge.com. We'll continue to have breaking coverage of anything and everything Oregon State as far as the transfer portal, recruiting coverage, and off-season analysis of the class. We'll also be shifting into some basketball and baseball coverage as well. So it's the time to be to BeaversEdge.com. Make sure to stay tuned as we'll have continuing coverage of Oregon State athletics.